Pigeons. Pigeons are a nuisance to most people. They seem to think of them as vermin. But for me, pigeons have always held a dear place in my heart. And that's probably because of what happened to me when I was a little girl. My father always went into town every night all winter long to fix the fire in the Borough Building and batten down everything for the night. And I always rode along. On one of those trips on a cold winter's night, we found a pigeon cuddled on the stairs to the basement at the Borough Building. It was gray and white, and it cooed and shivered, but it didn't fly away when we went down the dark steps. I was an animal lover from way back, and so I was concerned about the health of this poor pigeon. My dad took it into the lighted basement and looked it over, and it had a broken wing. It couldn't go anywhere, and so it was sheltering as best it could against the cold winter wind in that little alleyway behind the building where the steps went down inside. I convinced my father that we should take the pigeon home, although he knew there would be thunder to pay from my mom, who was not anywhere near as big an animal lover as my father and I were. We found an old box in the basement, put some sawdust in the bottom of it, and put the pigeon inside. On the way home, I held the box, and I was so excited about my find, a new pet. But my father insisted that we would only keep the pigeon until it was well. In fact, that was the only way we got to keep the pigeon at all, because when we got home, my mother took one look at the bird and said, "Pigeons are dirty. That thing does not come in the house." Well, we compromised with it staying in the out kitchen, or summer kitchen as some folks might call it. It wasn't heated there, and so it was probably better for the bird, so that it didn't get used to the warmth, but it was there where it could heal its wing and learn to fly again. Everything went well for several weeks until one day my mother entered the out kitchen to get something, and the bird dived at her. Well, there was a fury and a ruckus over that. "That pigeon goes," my mother said. "It's time for it to be turned loose." I hemmed and hawed, and frankly so did my dad, because we had kind of gotten very fond of that bird by then. But my mother was insistent. She was not about to be dive-bombed or clean up pigeon poo every time she entered one of the rooms of her house. And so, very reluctantly, that evening, we turned the bird out. I took the box outside with the pigeon held tightly inside, opened the box, and the pigeon just stood there and looked at me like, "So what are we going to do now?" My father picked the bird up and threw it in the air, and the bird fluttered but came right back down and landed in front of us. Finally, my father had to shoo the bird away, and it finally flew off. I cried piteously that night, as every child would cry if they lost their best buddy, because I had become very fond of that bird. The next morning, there was a terrible ice storm, and I woke up to a world that was frozen. I went outside to break icicles off of the roof with a big high shovel, and that's when I saw it, across the road, on the fence for the farm field next to us. There stood the pigeon, frozen to the post, solid as a rock. The poor thing had not had enough common sense to fly and find a place to sleep. It had waited for us to come and get it all night long. I ran into the house horrified and screaming, tears burning down my face, and my mother and my father hurried into their boots and coats and went outside to see what had absolutely horrified me so badly. And there it sat, on the post across the road. The accusation in my eyes as I showed them had to burn my mother's heart. She pried that cold bird's claws off the post and carried it inside, but it was way too late for that little pigeon. It was dead. My mother made a bed out of some old packing material, and my father took the bird to the goat pens to wait until thaw so we could bury it. I don't think I ever quite forgave my mom for letting that pigeon die. But you know, all of us seem to learn something from that event. I learned that you lose things you love, and my mother learned to be a little more kind-hearted about things in the future. And my father, well, my father already knew you lose things you love, and my father was already kind-hearted. But what he learned was that his words were a salve for my broken heart and my tears, and that I could always find peace and safety in the sound of his voice and the feel of his arms. And I think that was a present to my dad as well as to me. And so when I see a pigeon, I smile a little and remember that pigeon that I loved that one winter. I know it isn't a grand story. It isn't marvelous, and maybe the ending isn't the one maybe people would like, but it's my story. And that is how Pigeon came to be part of my life. This story is not intended for anyone else's use, and it's copyrighted to me, Patty A. Wilson. I hope you enjoyed the story. Goodbye.